But anyway, we're having a great time with Adam Minter, Janine with Pathfinder's Downsizing Solutions, and we are senior move managers. So we downsize people. We help make them feel like, give them a gift of home is what we say all the time. We find what things that they want to take with them to their smaller apartment or living accommodations, and then how do we bless the things, help them to find peace, to release it, and we release it into a program that's called Project Good Works, which allows us to connect to beautiful nonprofits that minister to homelessness and human trafficking, and foster care kids are a big one, and all that kind of stuff. So it just depends on what the stuff is. But I'm kind of a nerd. And so this is our second installation, and we're doing this little interview with Adam Minter. He is the author of Secondhand and the Travels of, the Travels of the New Global Garage Sale. And everybody knows that Americans have a lot of stuff, and it's probably in our garages, etc. And we send it to the donation centers, and that was our first interview part. Part one of the interview was basically what happens in the donation centers. But I want to kind of like and back it up a little bit and find out. Give us a history lesson, Adam. Tell us about the history of consumption-based economics, which sounds like, what? This is so boring. I could just die. And if I was sitting in a history lesson in high school, I would probably put the pencil in my eye. But the older we get, the more history has relevance because we're old and we've lived through it.
Right.
And it's like, you know, so tell us a little bit, like the agrarian versus
Sure.
and where that shift happened, why it happened, and stuff like that.
Sure.
Necessary to understand.
Sure. Well, the idea of an economy that consumes really started with the Industrial Revolution in the UK in the early 19th century. And, you know, prior to that, societies were largely agrarian. You had cities, but, you know, they were still dependent upon the countryside. And then all of a sudden you could mechanize things and you could make more things than you could just by hand. And as this volume of stuff started coming out of the factories, you know, over the next century, over the next 2 centuries, we developed marketing, and we developed ways as societies to get people to not only buy stuff, but to want to buy stuff. And as that occurred, our identities started to become more tied up with our stuff, because industrialization is a wonderful thing. It raises everybody's living standards. But one of the things it did is that, you know, as people can stay home and deal with their stuff and play with their stuff and watch TV and play with the toys that everybody else has, they stop spending as much time in communities, everything from the Elks to religious organizations to going to political meetings to whatever, the stamp club. We become more tied up in who we are and define ourselves by the stuff we buy, the brands we own. And that becomes a very, very powerful hook that sort of keeps our economies running. And I think it explains a lot of the attachments that your clients, for example, will have to the stuff as you encounter them in the course of your work.
Absolutely. So every once in a while, I'll run across a gem, and I was in this, I was with a client, and he shared this book with me, and it's called The Rag Business. And this is a book that is so funny because it's talking about the fashion industry, but it's written in 1947. Yeah. So it has that perspective. And I got to read you this one part.
Sure.
It is so hilarious. Basically, it's talking about, where'd it go? Okay, it's talking about, this is all about the fashion industry in the 1940s. And so the question that confronts industry today is, can we put designing on a mass production basis? The answer is an emphatic no. And unless the halt is made very soon, the women's apparel industry will face utter ruin. That cracks me. That's the funniest thing I've ever read in my life. Fast forward about 70 years. And I don't know, Adam, I don't know. Do you think that what happened with the Industrial Revolution, and this was just a few years past that, and all of a sudden, you know, we've gone from having, remember when, well, a lot of people may not know that originally there was only 2 seasons of fashion. There was the fall and the spring, and it was a big deal and all that kind of stuff. And then
right.
And keep going. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, you know, what's so interesting is You know, I'm old enough, we're both old enough not to make any assumptions, but to remember, I have my, you know, I remember my grandmother sewing, I remember my mother sewing, you know, and the things that were made by hand really meant something. That wasn't just emotional, but it was also a family's wealth, because there was a lot of time and effort involved in making a garment, for example, you know, and that was significant. There's a reason why people used to request as a wedding gift linens, because they were expensive as can be. And now you can go and you can order a set of linens for your bed, and it's disposable. It's literally disposable. It's just, you know, you can pay, you know, more for a McDonald's Happy Meal than you can for a set of bed sheets, you know.
Yeah.
And so that does a very strange thing to our psychologies as consumers, you know, because then you know, it allows, when things become disposable, it becomes a way of displaying your identity. It becomes a way of you know, of putting out to people who you are via your stuff. We didn't really do that in the past, because it was a store of wealth. It was a way of thinking of things that was, you know, more close to home. And so we've really changed how things happen, and it's occurring even now. I mean, look what we do on social media. You know, we're constantly showing off who we are and the stuff we have and the way we dress. And again, that creates these very tight, and I would say oftentimes unhealthy emotional connections to our stuff and shopping. And it just sort of perpetuates this problem that we see piling up in our garages and attics and storage units.
It always fascinates me, because the clients that we have, a lot of them were babies of the Depression babies, or
Yeah.
they were teenagers in the Depression era or something like that. You know, it was definitely impacted them. And so they're savers, and they don't want to throw anything away. That's part of it. And then if you've got some skill sets, like you do know how to sew, or you've got a pickup truck, or you're good with tools or something like that, one, you've always got a friend, and two, you can fix it. You can fix it. You know?
Well, one of the things I saw, and it really stuck with me, it was just amazing to me, is that generation who you don't downsize. When I was doing this book, you know, I went with, you know, folks who help people downsize, and I was struck by how many homes had multiple broken vacuum cleaners in them. You know, when you're helping to there's you know, there's always 4 or 5 vacuum cleaners, you know, spanning decades. Why are those vacuum cleaners still there? You know, the theory amongst the people I spent time with was, well, you know, these are people from a generation who remember when you used to fix these things, you know, and now the prices have come down so much on them, it's probably less trouble and maybe even cheaper to buy a new one that maybe will only last a few years. But on the other hand, you have this attachment to a past, a way of thinking that said, no, you don't throw away a vacuum cleaner, you fix it. And so, you know, there are these generational issues out there that are really interesting, you know, especially that Depression generation. And, you know, and I know it well from my grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, when the other thing that emerged too is that in the Industrial Revolution, what caused that migration from agrarian to urbanization, and the cities filled up, and all of that kind of stuff, and production, factory production and everything increased. But also what emerged then from that was the middle class. And it wasn't that the middle class they just had more money than they were able to separate themselves because of their taking up the jobs in the factories and stuff like that. They got more money. That emerged, that basically the middle class emerged from the lower class. There was 2 classes, and then the emergence of the middle class came from wealthy lower class people making a different segment in themselves away from the lower class, which I find to be interesting as well, and basically the pursuit of the American dream.
Well, all of a sudden you had people who could never afford multiple changes of clothes. They could not only afford it, but the price of clothing had fallen enough because of mass production, because of factories, that they could afford a lot. And it keeps falling. I mean, it's amazing. It's one of the few things that seems to keep getting cheaper is clothing.
Technology.
Yeah,
it is. It's crazy. And you were talking about, we talked a few minutes ago about fast fashion and the seasons, basically a spring and summer season when fashion came out. Now it's 52 weeks a year. You know, 52 different times a year, because they're trying to catch the fad. They're trying to catch a buzz on social media, to catch a quick trend, to get Kim Kardashian or somebody to wear it put the lipstick on, or, you know, it's amazing what they're willing to do
Yes.
for endorsements, but whatever. You know, just to catch that wave and
Yeah.
get some kind of pop,
Yeah.
and go to the next one and the next one and then 52 times a year. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me about Chinese production versus pre 1960s, before Chinese started doing the production.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the trends of, you know, with apparel in particular over the last, you know, 200 years really is the price keeps ticking downward. And we've gone from, you know, the most obvious way is from making your clothes by hand to making them by machine. But there are improvements that can happen over the years, and you know, there's, you know, factory production has improved, and even before China and East Asia became involved, you saw improvements in the United States where they realized, you know, you could actually break this up, and one company would make collars and another would make sleeves, and then you send them all to one place and they sew them together, and that lowered the cost. It also lowered the quality because you didn't have one factory making the entire garment. And we see complaints as early as the 1970s about the quality of clothing in the United States going down. And when you see those complaints, people are saying it actually started during World War II, when the US Army had to figure out how to make cheaper clothing from less and less stuff. Then China enters the picture, and East Asia enters the picture in a big way in the 1980s. And they are able to take those improvements and throw a lot of people at the problem who don't make a lot of money. And so you have cheaper production methods already there. Then you lower the salaries of the people making them, and things get cheaper. And when things get cheaper, they get cheaper, you know, meaning the quality isn't quite as good. And we've seen that happen over the years. And it's, you know, it's labor isn't, you know, most people think, oh, it's the cheap salaries that make, you know, East Asian clothing so cheap. At one time that was the case, but also it's just gotten to the point where the technology is so good, the automation is so good. The logistics, meaning the ability to transport clothing from one place to another in a matter of a couple days, has gotten so good. You know, you can make patterns that a garment worker in Bangladesh, you know, can sew, you know, bingo, you know, after seeing it on a Paris runway on, you know, on Friday, they're making it on Monday. And so all of these things have happened, and it just has made everything so cheap and disposable.
Wow. So tell me about, okay, so tell me about the life cycle, for instance, compare a life cycle of a piece of clothing from 1950, 1960, something like that, to what we have now. And tell me about, like, how many lives does it have? It's kind of like a cat. It used to be like a cat.
Yeah, I mean, a garment, you know, a better made garment is going to have more users. You know, and if something was made in the 1950s, generally it was going to be a pretty durable. You know, it might be passed, you know, through a family. It might go into a garage sale in the 1970s when those became really big. It would be bought by somebody there. They may use it, and it continues to be used until it gets too holy, if you will, or whatever the issue is. If it's donated to a thrift store at that point, you know, depending on what the fabric is, it may, if it's cotton, you know, it would maybe be sent to a rag making facility where they actually cut it up and, you know, and then wash it, cut it up, and then maybe sell the rags to, say, an auto shop that uses those cotton rags to wipe off a dipstick or something like that. But it would be many, many lives. You know, a fast fashion garment made last week, those garments, you know, are going to sit in closets longer. They're going to be used less because people can buy more of them. You know, when they're washed, they fall apart more quickly. They pill. If it lands in a thrift shop, it may not qualify as being good enough merchandise for the United States. Somebody elsewhere might buy it, but, you know, the folks elsewhere, wherever elsewhere might be, they're sensitive to cheap garments as well. They don't want garbage either, because, you know, we're using more poly blends, so cotton and polyester together. It can't be used as a rag, you know, because you don't want to use a polyester doesn't absorb anything, so you don't want to use it to wipe anything down. You know, it might spark. So, I mean, you then have more and more garments flowing into landfills and incinerators because there just isn't that use for it.
So the irony is not lost on that point, in that we're trying to recycle, reduce, recycle, and reuse. and yet the stuff that's coming out of the original point of manufacturing basically has about 56 wears on it, and then it ends up back in the landfill. So it's not, doesn't even have the quality to even allow that mantra to take place.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, if you're buying, you know, cheaper stuff that's not durable, you're not doing you're not doing the local landfill any favors.
Right. So to understand and have basically a wardrobe that is quality, that has less stuff in it, but more adaptable, more flexible, or if you're a girl, I guess, maybe if you're a guy, I don't know. My husband has his uniform, you know, all guys have a uniform. So, but anyway, so, you know, just the classic things that are well quality over the life of that will last years and years and years. Investment pieces as opposed to just the fashion pieces.
Well, that's what I always tell people. I'm always asked for, you know, what's your advice to people? And, you know, I think when people ask me that, they're saying, you know, what thrift store should I go to? What app on my phone should I go to find great secondhand stuff? I tell them, look, go and buy secondhand where you buy secondhand. But the fact of the matter is, all of us need to buy new stuff, want to buy new stuff. And so if you can afford it, try and buy new stuff with the idea that I'm going to buy something that maybe somebody can use it after I'm done using it. And maybe it's something they can drop off at the Goodwill, and, you know, Goodwill's going to look at it and say, great, we can put this right on the shelf or right on a rack, you know, and that's, you know, that's a good way to go about your life. You know, if you're thinking about even what's going to happen when it's time for me to downsize, you know, I'm sure, you know, in your practice, you would prefer people have better stuff. It's just much easier to move and to get other people interested in it than if, you know, if they have a bunch of IKEA furniture, say, you know, in their home. So it's buy that better stuff, buy that more durable stuff if you're in a position to do it.
Right. And I remember as a kid, my mom, she would buy the used furniture, but then she would put her own thing on it. So shabby chic and slapping stuff and all that kind of stuff and reinventing it, making it your own.
Right.
A hand-me-down piece. You know, and sometimes you know, with Project GoodWorks, we're trying to connect it on a donation basis, but we'll also help our clients if they have a piece that we know is like hot on the market right now. For instance, say mid-century modern furniture, super sexy, super hot. We kind of try and connect them directly with a furniture reseller. Their house isn't full of remarkable furniture that's all mid-century. They just may have one or two cool pieces. And there was a client that we had not too long ago, and he had a mid-century modern dining room that was the bomb, but he had a living room that was 1980s. So the 80s furniture was able to go to a foster care family. It was in perfect condition, but it just wasn't fashionable. But the mid-century modern dining room helped him monetize that directly with, you know, somebody that resells it. So that way it was safe for him. And he got a little coin in his pocket, and he was still able to bless people with the stuff that wasn't as marketable. And so it worked out really great. So anyway, excellent. Okay, so when we come back, I'm going to ask about the boomers' impact. So, okay, so all you baby boomers, come back for the third installment here, and we'll kind of wrap it up with some more questions for Adam. Okay? Thanks, Adam.
Awesome.
Hey guys, it's Janine with Pathfinder's Downsizing Solutions. So this is our third interview with Adam Minter. He is the author of an amazingly cool book called Secondhand: The Travels of the New Global Garage Sale. I've read it. I have it so marked up and tagged in here and little post-it notes all over the place. Such a nerd. But anyway, I love it because I love digging in and understanding what it is that I can do to help my customers, and understanding the process of garage sales, thrift stores. That whole industry is super important as a senior move manager, as we help our clients downsize, to really give them appropriate information so they are well educated as to where the market is now in regards to the secondhand stuff. So Adam, in our other two interviews, I asked, you know, basically we looked at where's this stuff, and then we talked about the history of consumption-based economics, which still sounds so smart, like I'm supposed to be some kind of like college professor or something like that. But you know, I am smart, but it's just, oh wait, where'd you go? Okay, we are recording again. This is Janine with Pathfinder's Downsizing Solutions. Thanks for joining us. This is our third section, third interview with Adam Minter. He wrote this really cool book called The Second Hand, The Travels of the New Global Garage Sale. So not only do we have local garage sales, remember those, but we also are in a global garage sale, and we've been talking about it. So he is helping me understand so that I can spread the information basically to my clients. As senior move managers, we help clients downsize and move to smaller communities, smaller homes. And what do you do with that extra stuff is we're always asking that question. But with Adam, on our first segment, we looked at basically where's the stuff and what happens when it goes to a donation center. And then our second segment was basically the history of consumption-based economics, which sounds super smart. So we're going to go with that. And then the last section here is I want to talk about my clients, what the boomers impact is and the boomers parents impact are, because those are the two clients that that's our typical go-to client base is right. Boomers and their parents. So a fifth of the population are boomers and they're aging out. So are their parents. Our average client is between 75 and 95. I can't wait to get our first centurion, but we don't have a centurion yet, but I'm waiting for it.
All right.
So they're aging out. And then every time I talk to somebody said, but my kids don't want my stuff.
That's it.
And there's a couple of tears shed. Then what?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting problem because there's a couple things with the boomers and their parents. First of all, you are seeing the two most affluent generations in world history. So more money than anybody in history has ever had. And on top of that, they live in a country with a lot of space. So they have the biggest houses on average that anybody has ever had. So you know what that means. Both generations have been able to fill those houses and those garages and all of the storage units blooming out on the prairie like corn, with stuff,
Yeah.
And then the irony of it all is that the boomers gave birth to Gen X, and Gen X was not as affluent, is not as affluent, and they are not as interested in stuff. And so, and you see that go on to these younger generations, the boomers kids, the millennials, and then was it Gen Y they call the next one, or Gen Z? I get lost in it.
Keep track of it.
Yeah, but we see consumer surveys showing that they still want stuff, but they don't want as much objects. They don't want the knickknacks. They don't want as much things in their home. They still want cars. And so you can see there's a supply and demand problem. A lot of supply, very little demand. And that's where we get this phenomenon where the kids say, we don't want the China. In China, what it represented to the boomers and their parents is very different than what it represents to kids these days. I mean, the rate of marriage is down from where it was, from that Depression generation and the boomer generation. They're just not interested in the artifacts of that kind of life. So it becomes a really big problem of where to go with that stuff. And so much of it that the boomers and their parents had a really strong emotional attachment to. The kids, Gen X, says, this doesn't mean that much to me.
Yeah. I mean, and even for our clients who may be boomers, but they're helping their greatest generation, their parents downsize and move into independent living and assisted living and doing there seems to be two phases of downsizing. One in your, the first phase, maybe after the kids have graduated from college, that era, and then another 15, 20 years later into senior communities. And so for our boomer clients that are helping their parents downsize, they don't want their parents' stuff either because they already have a house full of stuff. Yeah.
How many times have you been to a home where you've helped somebody downsize and found multiple generations of china in the basement? Grandma's china's down there, maybe, another grandma's china is down there. And so then you ask, the boomers, who definitely were of a generation that asked for china at their wedding, would you like to have this china? They say, what am I going to do with another set of china in my basement? And for sure, the greatest generation, that china meant something to them. You know, it was going to stay with them their whole life. But the boomers didn't sign on to that contract saying it's going to stay with me my whole life too. That was your china. That was your emotional attachment. It's not mine. And that, as you know, can become, you know, it can become very painful, you know, because we invest so much in American culture, in particular in our stuff and what it means to us. It's so wrapped up in our identities. And that's where these downsizings can be so, so painful.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're really excited about Project Good Works because what it allows us to do is to bless. Through Project Good Works, what we do is we find the nonprofits that are smaller. We don't necessarily send it to the big box. We're looking for those ministries that are here on the local level that may be ministering to foster care kids at 18. Most of the time, their whole lives that they've been in the system, they get about 10 minutes in a garbage bag to pick up their stuff to move on. And it's so, that is so awful to hear about. But if you can make a difference in maybe an 18-year-old that is, you know, basically aging out of the system, they have to have everything for an apartment.
That's a beautiful thing.
Isn't it awesome? And it's just like, and it makes such a trajectory. We had one lady that had 3 autistic kids and her refrigerator pooped out on her. And we had a client whose house, he was selling his house to a flipper. We had moved him and everything. And we found out about her. We went back to our client, who was an amazing, amazing guy. And he turned around and approached the guy that was buying the house and said, hey, let's put an addendum on the real estate contract. And they did. And we were able to pull that refrigerator out. It was a perfectly good refrigerator. It just wasn't the sexiest. It wasn't the newest. It wasn't the coolest stuff, but it was in great working order. Changed that woman's trajectory of where she was going to be in 6 months. That's so cool.
You know, and it's really neat because, I mean, one of the things I'm sure I found, you know, in looking at downsizings and services like yours, not just in North America, but also in Japan, you know, what makes a difference is if the people who are letting go of the stuff, the older generation, isn't always an older generation, but, you know, generally it is, if they know that somebody wants it, that it's going to be used, they're going to let go. And it's really interesting because what happens in North America and in Europe, we have the donation model, you know, and so that leaves people feeling unsteady sometimes because they say, is it really going to somebody who wants it? You know, and what's different in a place like Japan, where I've spent time looking at this, or in Malaysia, where I live and I've spent time looking at this, is that secondhand stuff out of a household is usually sold. And what happens when you sell something is you're saying, okay, somebody's buying it, they must want it. You know, and so that's a whole different thing, and that makes their hearts feel better. But we have in this country, and I think it's a beautiful thing generally, we have this donation model, but it, you know, it leaves people sort of hanging a bit emotionally, saying, is it really going to the right place? You know, and that can be very explosive because when people find out that it isn't going to what they consider the right place, they can, you know, become quite upset about it.
Well, right. And it's kind of like when it's just I'm going to, you know, I'm going to invest 5 minutes to call the big box and have them come pick it up. Then I don't have to think about it anymore. And moving is challenging anyway. So if that's what your time allotment is, then okay, fine. But what we try and do, because we have relationships with the smaller ones, is to really let them, you know, get them involved too. So it goes directly in the hands of somebody. But so the other thing that I was wanting to ask you too, does this donation model, it doesn't happen in Malaysia, it doesn't happen in Japan?
You know, you do the donation model. I mean, it does exist in other places for sure. I mean, there's always churches and, you know, and religious organizations that are, you know, will use that donation model, but it's much more common in emerging market countries, especially developing countries, to see people sell their stuff. You know, and that is, I think there's a few reasons for that, but I think the most important is that these countries, especially in East Asia and Africa, they are still developing. They aren't that far out of, you know, being out of poverty, out of being agrarian societies. And so there's just more of an attachment to the stuff. They can't get as sentimental about it. It's stuff, it's wealth. There's more sacrifice to acquiring it. And so because of that, they want to cash it out. And so when you cash it out and somebody buys it, you're like, hey, this is your problem now. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Or thank you for buying it. I know it's in good hands because you just paid X amount of money for it. You're not gonna waste it if you just paid that for it. So, but the donation model really is something that emerged in Anglo-America, in the UK and in the United States and Canada.
Yeah, and a lot of times, there's still garage sales all over the United States, and
yeah,
still very active. But a lot of our clients may not have the timeline to be able to do it, and it's a lot of effort.
And let's forget, there's always stuff left over after the garage sale.
And you're still calling to get the buttons backed up and dealt with. So yeah. So and it can be. I feel like there's a certain age group that works for, and then you kind of age out of that, and maybe it's not the safest thing for you to be doing on a Saturday morning and all of the heat and everything. But I'm in Florida, so everything's always hot. So anyway, so the idea of your stuff not going to waste is more important than anything else, and that's really where Project GoodWorks comes in. But tell me about designed obsolescence. That one I knew it was happening.
Well, so designed obsolescence is just the idea that manufacturers will make things to break. At a certain point, they'll make them, they want you to use them, but they'll make them to break so that you buy another one. And there's some very famous examples of this. Light bulbs, for example, when they first were being produced, you had a consortium of light bulb makers get together and say, let's make sure these only last X number of hours so people come back and buy more. And it worked out really great for light bulb manufacturers. In the 1950s that automobile manufacturers we're very much trying to manufacture cars so that people would buy a new one every year. That annual model really aimed initially to get people buying an annual model. It didn't work that way, but the manufacturers quickly realized that wasn't going to work, and people really did, want an aftermarket for their vehicles. And we see it occurring even today, and it's done in very interesting ways. With the stuff we buy. If you buy a smartphone, for example, today, you don't know how long the company that makes it is going to support the software, keep giving you software updates so you don't get hacked, so it works properly. One of the ways they can get you to buy another one is to say, okay, we're only going to support it for 2 years. They can make it hard to switch a battery out of your smartphone. I mean, I think we can all remember when we first, we had mobile phones and, the battery's running dead. Well, you just open up the back real easy, and pop in a new one. Try and do that with your iPhone. And now we've gotten to the point which when you step back and think about it, I know so many people are like, oh, the battery's dying on my phone, I should buy a new one, and I just sort of, how did that happen? But it's an absurd thing to do because you can get a battery change in your phone. And so these are just different ways that manufacturers design, to limit the lifespan of our stuff. So we buy more of it. And it makes it hard on thrift stores. It makes it hard on places like eBay, all of these places we buy and sell our used stuff because it's obsoleted, meaning that it just isn't good after a certain period of time. It's junk and it accumulates, and somebody's got to figure out what to do with it in our storage units or attics or garages or whatever.
So what is your advice to do? What is your advice for CDs, DVDs, VCR tapes, what else? Oh, and cassette tapes, because we had a client the other day and it was just like, I called all my sources that are usually interested in, and they're like,
yeah, I mean, all of those old forms of media, there's just no market for them. And people, there's a few people out there who might want a DVD or something as a collector's item, but that market isn't there. There was a time when DVDs and CDs could be literally recycled and people would want to take the aluminum out of them. And it's worth calling around to, your county drop-off sites, your city drop-off sites, and seeing if they take them, because I know there are companies who still do it overseas, and that's worth calling around about and seeing if they'll take them. But pretty rare at this point that you'll find people even doing the recycling of those. And so what does that mean? These old forms of media become garbage.
Yeah. Ugh.
I know. Let me join you with one of those. I mean, it's just the worst.
Yeah, and you just feel like you just can't even, it just, it is. I think I said it in one of the other sections, it just feels like a tsunami.
Yeah. And the tsunami, I mean, you know this as well as anybody. That wave is getting bigger and bigger as the boomers retire. You know, there is an extraordinary amount of stuff just waiting, sitting there, all of these the VHS tape collections and all that nobody is going to want, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, if we can figure out how to run a car, maybe run a Tesla off of a VCR tape, recycling.
I like that idea.
Oh, Elon,
Yeah.
call me. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's so cool. We absolutely have enjoyed it. I think 3 or 4 of us now in Pathfinders has read the book. What was your biggest takeaway? What was the one thing as you were putting together this book that you thought, oh my gosh, I never connected that dot to that dot. Holy cow.
You know, it was when I was in Japan at a company called Book Off, which is the second largest secondhand retailer for profit in Japan. And they took me to their book sorting warehouse. And there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books there. And I never realized how many books there are and how there just isn't demand for them. I mean, if you're in this business, you know, people have books in their basement and college textbooks, but when you see them in one place, and Book Off was trying to find value in them, and most of them they didn't, so they're off to the paper recycling plants. And as an author, it was just heartbreaking to me, but there's just too many books out there. I mean, and those two are disposable. As an author, I invest so much into them, but I suddenly realized I need to stop buying them because there's just enough. You know, there's that book you want out there is, you know, you can probably find it online as a Kindle or something like that. And then what a horrible thing for me to say, you know, as, you know, I still want people to read my book, you know, don't buy books, but it's really a hard thing. And that was for me a revelatory moment.
Wow. I mean, I can imagine, especially as an author, that would be, wow, not even me.
Yeah. I didn't sleep well that night, but you know it, because you see all the books in people's homes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And then and everything is so digitized, and like,
yeah.
I mean, everything is digitized. We're doing this interview. I'm sitting in Florida.
Yeah,
You're sitting in Minnesota, for Pete's sakes. I mean, this is crazy.
And that's a good thing. And that's something to be optimistic about, because, you know, my generation and the generations that follow mine, we are going to be generating less stuff because everything is in the cloud. You know, we're certainly buying more clothes, but, you know, the VHS tapes and all that, that's not
that's
true.
true.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's good. And part of me thinks like, okay, so if the millennials going forward don't want any stuff and they're all experience based, which I think it's cool and it's commendable.
Yeah.
There's no problem with that, but it's just kind of like in the midst of swimming through all this stuff. It makes me ponder when they get to be retired and they're retiring into and downsizing. What does that look like?
Yeah.
What does that look like for the next generation of processing this stuff? Because there still will be the latest version of your iPhone, the latest, technology and all that kind of stuff. They will still be consumption driven.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, we can't get away from it.
No.
There's no way.
It's interesting.
So it is. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. But I do thank you so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to just staying in touch with you. And gosh, I'm just tickled pink. I feel like gosh, this is so cool.
Well, so am I. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. And let's do it again. Thank you for being interested in my work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. It just fits so nicely to what we're all about with Project Good Works and taking care of our clients and helping them find peace to release. So it's huge. It's a huge part of it. But what's your next book that you're writing?
I don't know quite yet. I mean, COVID slowed everything down. I had a couple ideas, but as you know from reading this one, I travel a lot for my books, and if I can't travel, I can't really investigate and sort of focus my idea. So I'm not sure yet. It will certainly have something to do with stuff. I have an idea. I never say my ideas until they're fully formed. It's superstition of mine. But it is stuff related, and it's a different angle on this issue that we all face.
Did this book take you a long time?
Depends how you look at it. In a sense, a whole lifetime. I mean, I grew up around, my grandmother, she taught me a lot. And some of the reporting dates back to my first trip to West Africa in 2015, when I started thinking about maybe there's something to be said about how stuff flows from one place to another. And then from the time I signed the contract to the time I turned it in, it was about 2.5 years, which is very fast.
Ah,
But,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Not being a writer, that seems really slow, but it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's about 1.5 inches, but it is so much information. It's just mind blowing. It really shifts your perspective on
Thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah.
That really makes me feel like the project was worth it. To hear somebody who's involved in it the way you are,
Yeah.
that it meant something to you is really meaningful to me. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I can't wait I've got to go get the first one. The first one was Junkyard Planet.
Right.
And the second one was this one. And so I'm looking forward to the third one too. So I got to go run. I got to get to the bookstore.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. This was just fun. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great night. Okay.
Okay. You have a good night back your way too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.